Tracy, I know you've got a daughter who is at that transition age, which is scary. How are you? How do you handle
Oh,
boundaries?
that's a good question too. Like I feel
Maybe
like
not.
Christy, that's a really good question. And I even think about my adult daughter who's like in her 30s, and I was actually listening to something yesterday, about supporting our children that are transitioning or are in adulthood. And setting those boundaries and kind of supporting them, but helping them at the same time. But yeah, it's difficult. It's been a difficult path, especially with my 30-year-old. There had been a time where she was off of her medication and it was incredibly difficult. That was a time that I even had my grandson for a little while so that she could focus on her mental health. And I think that that was helpful. But even for the daughter that's transitioning, that is so difficult because we're trying to teach her how to become an adult, how to navigate her own decisions. But then she looks at me and goes, "But you can for me." And I'm like, "No, but when you turn 18 in 6 months, that's going to change where everybody's going to be asking you for this
Yeah.
information. So you need to start learning." And it's difficult. It is difficult. And I applaud you, Chrissy, for kind of stepping back a little bit on this and saying, "You know what? I'm taking the back seat on this one," because that is incredibly hard, especially on you. You know what I mean? So I applaud
Yeah.
you.
It's not easy. I know that I have a story that I tell about sitting in an office for an appointment, and a friend of mine was there, and my daughter and I are talking, and she's talking about getting her driver's license, and she says, "Oh, I need to make a doctor appointment." And so I threw her my phone with the doctor's office phone number in it and said to her, "Go ahead." And my friend looked at me and was like, "You're going to make her own appointment?" And I said, "I think if she, I
Oh
think if
my
she's going to be
gosh.
able to drive a car, she should be able to make a doctor appointment." And they were like, "Oh yeah." And I could tell it was kind of the first time that they thought about that. And I'm glad that I expressed myself and my purpose behind it. But sometimes we even get that pushback when we try to set boundaries and help our children do for themselves. I think we get pushback from other people who look at us like, "Well, you should be doing it for them." And so I think it's important for us to really encourage people and each other and say, when you do things for someone else, you're denying them that opportunity to learn. So, especially in safe environments. So, Tracy, your environment right now where your child isn't 18 yet, and you can give her that safety net to fall into. And then, of course, as once our kids turn 18, we're still their safety net, but it's different because we can't call the doctor for them. They won't talk to us.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was even talking to somebody last night about this, and and there's so many questions that you run into when your child is transitioning to adulthood, right? How do we become, still a partner with them and still teaching them, and especially when they're struggling with their own mental health, to be able to speak to people, to at least give information, not necessarily just to receive it. I want to be able to still give it, so that they are aware of what's happening. A lot of times, even in the course of her mental health, I've always had to try to inform because she doesn't have that cognitive ability to remember 5 days ago when everything was so incredibly difficult and we might have had some big, huge, tragedy. And then by 5 days later, she's like, "Oh, I'm fine. Everything's been good." And I'm like, "Do you remember like a couple days ago happened?" And she's like, "Oh yeah, yeah, I think I better talk about that." And I'm like, so I think, even now she's got school-based, mental health. And I just inform, I don't want to know what they're talking about, but I try to just let her know, hey, I just want to let you know this is what's happening. And my daughter might not remember how to discuss that with you. So it's up to you to try to see if you can bring it up. So, inform, not necessarily get information.
But Chrissy, are you thinking, because you're the one here who has little ones? So are you kind of setting boundaries with the little ones on what you'll do for them and what you kind of want them to do or what is acceptable in your house?
Yes and no. We're working on that a little bit, especially with the older two. She's 11. She's in 6th grade. She's a perpetual baby. I don't even know how to explain that any other way. So we struggle with that. My 8-year-old's way more independent. Like the other day I was napping and she went downstairs and just cleaned the kitchen because she just felt like she wanted to. And she likes to pick out her own clothes and she likes to pack her own lunch and she likes to do her own thing. So that one I don't have to worry too much about. The oldest one still won't order her own food in a restaurant, still won't stir her own salad. We went to dinner last night and she had to cut up her steak, order her food, stir her salad for her. Everyone else, the little ones are all fine. She's the oldest. But we're working on it, I guess. I've been trying to make her more independent. This year I was real hands off with school and she's surprising me with how well she's doing. So normally I was, always talking to her teachers, always on her about her assignments. And the middle school guidance counselor is a friend of ours and she was like, just back off, see how she does. If she completely sinks, then you jump back in. But she said she might surprise you, and she did. She's doing very well. She missed a science assignment. This was the first one she missed all year, so it brought her down to a B. She brought home her progress report yesterday and she was like, oh, I have an 89%. And I was like, I'm really happy with 89%, but I'm not going to say that out loud. So she'll be okay. I gotta push her. I gotta push her.
Well, but I mean, I think that we all have nobody is 100% independent. That's kind of this myth that we have created and we are perpetuating. Nobody does everything by themselves. And I think, especially, for goodness sake, she's 11. So she's managing the things that are important, and in which case it's you not having to say to her, did you bring home this book? Are you doing your homework? But sometimes we all like to be babied, And so, it could also be a bit of an anxiety thing where maybe talking in a restaurant is, to a stranger is a little bit much at the moment. So I think, my goodness, at 11 years old, if she's kind of managing her own workload at school and staying on top of things, that is a huge, huge win. And, it's not like we say, okay, you're 8. Good luck. I'll keep a roof over your head and maybe sometimes I'll fill the fridge. You're on your own. But it sounds like she's really, though, kind of, starting to step into some things where last year maybe she wasn't ready for it yet.
Oh my God, yeah, she's doing great. I can't complain. I was the kid that was left to my own devices. I was the oldest. I had a dysfunctional household growing up. And so probably from about Alex's age, I was on my own. I was watching my little siblings and doing everything I was supposed to do. So to see her do it on her own when she doesn't have to is pretty cool. I like that because I was always kind of bitter about it, mad at 11 years old that I had to babysit. My youngest sister was born when I was 11 and she was born in March. And that summer, my parents pulled her out of daycare and I watched her through the summer to save money on daycare, and I was 11. So then I think of my 11-year-old that can't order in a restaurant, and then I think of myself with a newborn baby. So
that's a lot. That's a lot.
Where my feeling responsible for my siblings comes from, probably from that time.
So probably somewhere between here's your newborn brother, babysit him for the summer, and here's a house to live in and there's some food in the fridge is probably, where most of our parents are.
Yeah,
most of want to be somewhere in that spectrum.
Yeah, we had working parents. I mean, I didn't have a bad situation. We lived in a nice house. There was always food, whatever. My parents were a nurse and a teacher, so it was fine. But nobody was ever home because everybody was making money. You know what I mean? My dad worked a second job. My mom worked a second job. It was just, I was in home, childcare. But it worked.
The world was different back then.
It was.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
it really was. And so it's kind of funny to think about, like my generation was feral, and because that was just par for the course at the time. And then it seems like society swung completely to, the other side where parents were supposed to drive their kid to the bus stop and like sit with the kids in the warm car until the bus came. So it seems like society kind of swung a lot. And I think for some parents, it's hard to find what's appropriate, what's okay too for you between you're totally on your own and, let me watch over you all the time.
I think we
But
overcompensate sometimes. Like
yeah,
I do. I do. I think that, yeah, my generation, we overcompensate because of the way that we were brought up. We helicopter, and maybe that's not good all the time for our kids because we're in every aspect of their lives. We're on top of them all day long. Like maybe that's not good for them because they aren't, getting to explore the world the same way we did.
yeah. But at the same time, we do things like manage their medication. Did you take your medicine? That reminding them. I mean, if you've got a child with ADHD, and one of the big like problems with ADHD is forgetting things, obviously you're going to say to your child, "Hey, let's take our medication now," to help them then
Mm-hmm.
have a better day in school. We are probably likely to set up some supports and accommodations for them, asking for like an extra set of books at home. And, when they're little, something that goes back and forth between school so that we know what's expected of them so we could reinforce that. And then hopefully when they get to that high school level, we can start to hand some of that stuff off to them a little bit more with things like put reminders in your phone and write down what you need to do and start teaching them.
I am laughing because I'm like, I wish my high schooler would do that, setting the reminders. She never does it. And I'm like constantly going, "Did you take your medicine today?" She's like, "Oh no, I didn't." And I'm like, "Oh, really? I can kind of tell right now, set those reminders." In all the tools that we have in this day and age to help us technology, reminder, to remind us of all these things, and they don't do it. I'm just like,
Yeah, they don't
oh my
realize what they
gosh,
have.
please start
Don't
working
realize
on it. I know. I was even at an IEP meeting and we were talking about the text to speech. This generation definitely talks into their phone when they're messaging, but it doesn't transfer to school. The assistive technology person was in the IEP and she's like, they don't use the text to speech for their schoolwork. We know that they're using it on their phones all the time, but they're not doing it in school. And she's like, I don't understand why. I go, please, when you find out, let me know because
So true.
I'd like to know.
I just had this conversation with my daughter the other night. She was like, had spelling. She had to like write sentences with her spelling words and do like her spelling words 3 times each. And her wrist was bothering her from cheer. And I was like, type them. And she's like, no, I don't want to type them. I'm like, type them. It'll take you half the time. You won't hurt your arm. And she's like, my teacher's going to get mad. I emailed the teacher. The teacher's like, I don't care how she does it. Just tell her to do it.
My daughter will write the note, get her thoughts down on paper, and then like type it out or speak. And the teacher's like, you're doing double work. Like if you just skip the writing part and just get it out on text to speech, it would be a lot easier. She's like, I'd still like to write it out. And I'm like, oh my gosh.
So I wonder if one of the ways that we could kind of work our kiddos towards independence and also help us out is to really see if we could get them on board with using one thing to make life easier. Like, hey, this month, how about if we try setting reminders and see how many times you could remember to take your medicine on your own? and then maybe do a goal. Like if you do it, if you remember to take your medicine on your own 20 days out of the 31 in March, will whatever fits into your budget as kind of a little bit of a reward. And maybe that will be an incentive for them to give it a shot. So as we're starting to move them towards independence, no matter how old they are, if we could do one little thing at a time, maybe that might be helpful, especially if we could get them on board with it. Like maybe if there's a couple things that you can pick, give them like, maybe if you think of like 3 things and see if anything on there sounds appealing to them to start thinking about sort of doing on their own. I know when my kids were little, they, especially like my son was like, no, I got it. I'll do it on my own. But sometimes if you have to push them a little bit, maybe that could, I don't know, maybe that could help a little bit. Just pick one thing.
I will try that. I will certainly try. I mean, we've tried. We've even said, set your alarm so that you're getting yourself up. Remind yourself to take your medicine when you get home after you have your afternoon snack. I can't talk. But yeah, I do think that just having that goal to maybe have them set their reminders and have kind of like a reward afterwards will hopefully help.
Well, maybe especially with the younger ones.
Yeah. Teach them when they're young, Chrissy.
We have a reward-based household as it is. They are always trying to earn something because that's the only way that I can get them to keep their room sort of clean or not throw their clothes on the floor or whatever. So It's like, hey, clean your room and we'll do this, or hey, do this and you can have this. My oldest is obsessed with Snapchat and I keep taking it away and then she earns it back. And that's been a big motivator because I'll be like, do you want to lose Snap again? If she starts yelling or doesn't want to do what I ask. But I don't have hugely high expectations of them because both parents are neurodivergent in our house. So we just are we all just get along to get along. So I don't have crazy high expectations either. And I do reward things that maybe other people wouldn't reward, like grades or not forgetting homework. Like if you do all your homework for a whole 9 weeks, you can go buy whatever you want, because that's huge, because it is hard. It's hard for me to remember everything I have to do. Mm-hmm. It's really hard for their dad to remember everything he has to do. He struggles with executive function worse than I do. So we maybe are a little more laid back when it comes to parenting than some other people are, but most of our kids are pretty well behaved. They all get pretty good grades. I can't complain too much.
Yeah, I think that I think probably the most important thing is when you have a child who has any kind of difference, mental health difference, they're neurodivergent, they have a learning difference, they have special medication needs, or they have a physical disability. I think that you have to remember that some of these rules about parenting were written for these ideal situations, for these imaginary ideal families. And they're an option to think about, but certainly not some kind of well-researched, well-reasoned standard that anyone should strive for. You can never reward your child for, don't do that, because then they'll want to be rewarded for everything. But isn't that the reason why we go to work? We may work for a nonprofit, but that doesn't mean that we still get paid, we get benefits that are important or critical for our families. So right now we live in a bit of a reward-based society. So while certainly we sometimes do things for our internal motivation, especially if you have a child who needs a little bit of extra help, give them that little bit of extra help and don't beat yourself up over it. Whatever gets it done to create that learning opportunity so our children know that they're comfortable, I can do this, Then when they have no choice, because unfortunately we know if your child moves out of the house, they're going to be responsible for taking their own medication, for refilling their own medication, for making their own doctor appointments. And unfortunately, they might have to learn that the hard way by losing a job or failing a class or being dropped by their psychiatrist for missing too many appointments. So we're just trying to help soften the blow so that they don't have to learn in really hard ways. And we don't have to explain that to anyone, why we're doing that, and get them to understand how our family is different than their family. You do what works for you, and I'm going to do what works for me until it doesn't work, and then I'm going to try something else.
Yeah, turn off the judgment from, extended families that don't live in your household. I think that was one of the hardest boundaries too, to kind of like start having is, people only see what they're allowed to see. Like holidays, Christmas, you're only seeing them how many times a year? And the comments like, oh, well, she seems fine. I don't know what you complain about all the time. And I'm like, you don't live in my house. You don't see the constant meltdowns when school ends or, not getting, their way or whatever, you don't live that. So yeah, shutting out the noise of others.
Yeah, that's really hard. I don't even like it when people are here because they all have comments about the way that things are. But it's not an aesthetically pleasing spaces here. It's just what functions. So my boys' clothes are in the living room in one of those like dressers with the soft drawers, like
Yeah.
on the back of the couch, because that's the only way that they get put away and they don't get thrown all over the floor. So we function. It's functional. My bathrooms have stands in them with drawers, and the drawers are filled with stuff. Doesn't look nice. Doesn't matter because it functions. Like stuff's not on the floor. Everybody in my family lives in like HGTV houses, and I've never. That's just not been my thing. There's like books everywhere. Whatever. It's neat, but it's not, high functioning chaos. But my mom comes in with her nose in the air and it's like, listen, it works. Their clothes are clean. They're in a drawer. They know where they are. Like they get dressed in the living room and we lay their clothes out on the back of the couch. Everyone's like, it works. It works. I get my kids to school on time. They're clean. They match. Like we're winning in that regard, but you can't please everybody. You can't please everybody.
Yeah. And you shouldn't have to, and you shouldn't feel like you have to. Did I tell you guys a story about the crappy therapist that that we went to, my son went to, after we had a really good therapist for quite a while, and he had worked with my child for a really long time, and they had made some gains, but had kind of reached the end of where they were going to go. So we moved on to a different therapist, and she was awful. I remember her saying to me, I talked about how I had these dry erase boards in my house. They were lovely. They went with the decor. I didn't have a ton of them. I had, as she implied, I had one in our dining room. And one of the things that I learned was my kids would call me after school and they'd say, like, what's my chore? And it would be like, I don't know, you feed the cat and you empty the dishwasher. And then the other one of them would pick whatever the easier chore was and leave their sibling with the chore that they didn't want to do, which was anyway, big thing. And so what I learned was it was easier to write everything down. So Monday, these are the chores and this is doing it. Tuesday, these are the chores and this is who's doing it. And the therapist was like, your house must be filled with all kind of notes and reminders. And I was like, really? Is that something helpful for you to say? Because she said it in clearly a very negative, I can't remember the exact wording she used, but a very negative, judgy kind of way. And I was thinking to myself, okay, lady, you are a therapist working with my child with ADHD. And if it gets done and it's working for us, why so judgy? Why so judgy? Yes. So, there can be people who are trained to not be judgy, who still are. And, I was kind of like, this is what works for us. It goes with the decor. It makes life easy. I guess when I want your opinion, I'll come back for another appointment.
Even if it doesn't match the decor, who cares? I painted a whole wall in my
Right.
kitchen chalkboard paint because I wanted to not forget stuff. And it looks
Yeah.
like I don't care, and I write
Yeah.
stuff on every single day. We got ours
Yep.
as a society, we got away from like what houses are supposed to be. They're like a tool. They're, safety from the elements and where you live. Like, it doesn't have to be pretty.
Yeah.
It gives me an opportunity to mention one of my favorite creators. Her name is Casey Davis. She has a website. I know she's on TikTok, I'm sure Instagram, whatever. She has this really great, she is a therapist herself and identifies as a person with a mental health challenge, and talks about how a clean, orderly home is not a moral thing, and how you can create systems within your home so that things are manageable and work for you and your family. And she'll show, like, this is how I do like a quick cleanup at night so my house is manageable. And one of the things that she talks about is she actually uses a dish drain for her dirty dishes, which sounds really weird, but if you think about it, this way it keeps the sink clean, or empty, so that you could still do whatever you're going to do. And so I guess she rinses off her dishes and stuff, puts them in the dish drain, and then at night when she's doing her like cleanup, maybe empties the dishwasher and puts the dirty dishes in. And so for her, it's what works to keep things moving so that her sink isn't overly piled, so you can't even get in to wash your hands or get water for cooking, or whatever the need may be. And she just really has some very practical tips for parents who maybe themselves, you have a neurodivergence or you have a mental health challenge, but she also even gets into ways that you can do things if you have like a physical disability, or maybe there's reasons why you're not as mobile as some other people may be. And I love it because it's very much a no judgment zone. This is just how we keep things moving. And when you were talking, Chrissy, about the dressers in the living room, you know what, if that's what works for you, who am I to judge?
Yeah.
And I should keep my opinions to myself on that if I don't like it.
No, it works fine. And I was with the dish thing. Like, everyone does their dishes at night. I don't. I do them first thing in the morning. Like, while the kids are getting ready for school, I load the dishwasher and I start a load of clothes every single morning. But what worked for us mostly, because my husband and I are 39-year-old children. Like, we really struggle with like adult things, is routines. Like, we know, like on Monday nights, I clean the toilets. As soon as we get home from cheer and I feed the kids dinner, like, we have 4 toilets. I go clean all 4 toilets on Monday nights. And I know I have to start a load of clothes every morning. And I know I have to load the dishwasher every morning. And, I am a creature of habit. So if my routine gets screwed up, I lose it a little bit. So I think we have more patience with our kids just because we both struggle. My husband was off work last week. He had pneumonia, so he was home the whole week because of the dust. He was fine. He could have, not fine, but he could have, if he had a desk job, he could have went to work. It was just, he doesn't work in that environment. And he forgot to shower. I had to tell him he had to shower because he always showers at work. And so, like, 4 days in, I'm like, sir, you haven't showered since you've been home. He's like, yeah, I have. I was like, you haven't showered since Friday. That was your last day of work. And he was like, oh my God, I have to go shower. I'm disgusting. But it wasn't like because of being sad, or like wasn't because of anything else. It just messed up his routine and he didn't even think about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think that probably helps our kiddos too, though, is when we have a routine. I know I used to have a bedtime routine with the kids when they were little, and that kind of prepares our body for the next thing, but also just helps. We have so much to think about anymore. We are on so much information and activity overload that it's, I think, really good to have routines that kind of help us get through the day, but it also helps our kids know what's next. So, If they know we get home from cheer and mom goes off to do her thing, and then, whatever, I think that helps them with those mini transitions throughout the night. So I love that. And if it works for you, again, there you go.
Oh yeah, we're huge routine people. That's like even down to like the kids picking their clothes out. Like they just know to go do it. Lay them on the back of the couch, get your socks, get your shoes, glasses, whatever it is, put it all there so that it's not mayhem in the morning. Because when the oldest one was little and she was by herself and I was still acting like a child, we struggled. We were late all the time and I was like, I'm going to end up getting in trouble. So we developed that routine, and thankfully we did, because I never really planned on having any more, just her. And then we decided to have her sister, and then my nephew showed up a year later. So thankfully, I am never somebody that should have been successful with 4 children, but we do pretty good, surprisingly.
I love the idea of having your child pick out their clothes the night before. Mornings were always a struggle. Even if they pick out their clothes and they change their mind, but it's getting something started for the next day. That was something that one of our family-based therapists had recommended, and it really did kind of like settle down the meltdowns in the morning. We still had them, but at least it was one less meltdown that we had.
We have a hard line rule. Like whatever you decide on the night before, unless you up and it's got a hole in it or the dog like snotted on it or something, you're not allowed to change it. Like whatever you agree to, that's what you're wearing. Come hell or high water, that's what you're wearing. And with snacks too, like if they decide they're packing the night before, they're packing. We're not changing our mind. You can't change your mind in the morning.
That's good.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I think those are some great tips. We'd love to hear from our audience. If you guys have some other tips to share with people on how you kind of manage and get through the morning or get through the afternoon, or if you have some boundaries in your house on like, I am absolutely not doing laundry unless your pants pockets are emptied and your underwear are taken out of your jeans, whatever those are, share them with us. We'd love to hear it. But thanks everybody for your day or for your time. And you ladies go out and have a great day. I'll talk to you later.